The alarm on my wrist buzzer went off 3 seconds before the auction closed, and my hand was already moving before my brain caught up. I slammed my palm on the bid pad and watched the number lock in red letters across the screen. Every alien in that room turned to look at me like I had just done something disgusting. My name is Ethan Cole, and I had just spent every credit I owned on a dead warship. The auction hall on Keswick Station smelled like burnt metal and stale gas, the kind of place where nobody came unless they were desperate or greedy. I was both. Around me stood buyers from 6 different systems, all wrapped in robes or shells or plated skin, all staring at the human who had just outbid nobody, because nobody else wanted the wreck floating in Dock 7. A tall Vren trader with gray scales down his neck leaned toward the being next to him and said, loud enough for me to hear on purpose, that only a fool or a human would waste money on a corpse. He wasn't wrong that it looked like a corpse. The ship on the auction screen was scorched black along one whole side, half her hull plating torn away like someone had peeled a fruit, and her drive section hung open to space, dark and cold. But I didn't see a corpse. I saw a heavy cruiser, real military bones under all that damage, the kind of ship that used to make entire systems think twice before starting trouble. Nobody builds ships like that anymore. Not with those reinforced spine trusses. Not with that shape. She was old, she was broken, and she was mine. The station clerk, a small insect-like creature with too many eyes, processed my payment without looking at me twice. To him, I was just another line in his ledger, another credit closed, another human who had made an expensive mistake. I signed the last form with a shaking hand and walked out of that hall, while the whispers followed me all the way to the door. Outside, the docking ring stretched out in a long curve of metal and glass, showing off ships that gleamed with fresh paint and working engines. Mine was 2 kilometers down that ring, in the section reserved for junk nobody wanted moved anywhere nice. I didn't care. I had a tug reserved, a private berth rented with money I didn't have, and a plan that made sense only to me. Everyone on this station hated humans. That wasn't a guess. That was a fact. I lived with every single day. We were the newest species to reach the stars, and somehow that made us the lowest ones too. Other species had fleets, histories, alliances that went back centuries. We had scraps. We had leftover jobs nobody else wanted, wages that barely covered rent, and stares that followed us everywhere we went. I had been a station mechanic for 4 years, and in that time, I had fixed engines for captains who wouldn't even say my name. So when this cruiser came up for sale, damaged beyond what any shipyard wanted to touch, priced so low it was almost an insult, I saw something nobody else did. I saw a chance. Maybe it was a stupid chance. Maybe it was the only one I would ever get. The tug pilot, a squat gray-skinned man named Perrin Voss who ran cargo routes for extra credits, met me at the berth with a look somewhere between confusion and pity. He asked me twice if I was certain about the coordinates, like maybe I had made a mistake typing them in. I told him no mistake, just tow the wreck to Bay 11, the private one, the one costing me almost everything I had left to rent. We flew out together in silence, his small tug rattling against the void, until the wreck came into view through the front window. Up close, she was worse than the auction photos. Long black scorch marks ran down her side like claw marks from something enormous. Her nameplate, half melted, showed only broken letters I couldn't read yet. Debris drifted near her hull, frozen pieces of whatever had once been inside her, tumbling slowly in the starlight. Perrin whistled low through his teeth and said this ship had been through something bad, something that killed people, not just damaged metal. I didn't answer him. I just watched her get bigger in the window, feeling something strange settle in my chest, something between excitement and a warning I couldn't quite name. We docked her in Bay 11 3 hours later, my tug groaning under the mass even with the auto thrusters doing most of the work. When the magnetic clamps locked into place with a heavy clunk, I felt the whole station shudder slightly under the weight of her. Perrin didn't stick around to help unload my gear. He just took his payment and left, muttering something about humans and their strange choices. I stood alone in the docking bay, staring up at the broken hull towering above me, lit only by the flickering emergency lights along the bay ceiling. She was massive, far bigger than anything I had ever worked on before, a shape built for war, not comfort. Even wounded like this, She carried herself like she still remembered being powerful. That first night, I didn't sleep in my rented room back on the station ring. I couldn't stop thinking about her, sitting there in the dark, waiting. So I grabbed my tool bag, my portable light, and a thermal blanket, and I climbed the loading ramp into her belly for the first time. The corridors inside were cold, colder than they should have been even for a dead ship. My light swept across walls stripped of wiring, torn panels hanging loose, and floors covered in a fine layer of frost that had somehow formed despite the station's climate controls. I made my way deeper, following the main spine, toward what I guessed was the reactor core, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have in the silence. Something about that silence felt wrong. Not empty wrong, more like held breath wrong, like the ship was listening to me walk through her without letting me know she noticed. I told myself it was nerves, adrenaline from spending everything I owned in one afternoon, nothing more than that. I found the crew quarters near the middle deck, small rooms lined along a narrow hallway, doors torn from their hinges in some places and sealed shut in others. Most were empty, stripped bare by scavengers before the auction, but one room still had a bunk bolted to the wall, its frame twisted but usable. I set my blanket down there, deciding this would be my bed for as long as it took to bring her back to life. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing small sounds through the walls, faint clicks, and low hums that shouldn't exist in a ship with no power running through her veins. I told myself it was thermal contraction, metal settling after being moved, nothing more sinister than physics doing what physics does. By morning, exhausted but determined, I started my first full day of work. The repair job ahead of me was enormous. Entire sections of wiring needed replacing, and I had no manual for a ship like this, no blueprints, nothing but instinct and years of fixing other people's mistakes. I began in the auxiliary power room, tracing cables back to their source, testing connections with equipment I had bought secondhand, and repaired myself more times than I could count. Hours turned into days. I ate cheap ration bars sitting on the cold floor of the engine room, slept in short bursts on that twisted bunk, and worked until my hands cramped from gripping tools too tight. Slowly, piece by piece, I started to understand her systems. They weren't like anything from human shipyards, more elegant somehow, built with a kind of care that felt almost personal. On the fifth day, I found something that stopped me cold. Behind a service panel near what I now knew was her primary computer core, I discovered a conduit still holding a faint charge. Weak but present, like a heartbeat too slow to notice unless you were looking for it. No power source on this ship should have held any charge after all this time adrift. I stared at that readout on my scanner for a long moment, feeling that same strange warning from my first night settle back into my chest. I didn't touch it that day. I told myself I needed rest, needed to think it through before doing anything reckless with a system I didn't understand. So I sealed the panel back up, packed away my tools, and climbed back to my bunk, my mind racing with questions I had no answers for. That night, lying in the dark, I swore I heard my name. Not clearly, not like someone speaking normally, just a faint whisper carried through the ship's cold metal bones, so quiet I convinced myself I imagined it. I lay there for an hour, listening, hearing nothing more than the ship settling around me, until exhaustion finally pulled me under. Morning came, and with it, a strange kind of clarity. Whatever fear I had felt the night before faded into determination. If something strange was happening inside this ship, I needed to understand it, not run from it. I had spent everything I owned on her. There was no turning back now, not for me. I spent that day mapping every system I could find, drawing my own diagrams since none existed anywhere I could access, cross-referencing patterns I recognized from human tech with the alien architecture surrounding me. It was slow, careful work, the kind that demanded total focus, and for a while it pushed every strange thought from my mind. By the time station lights outside dimmed into their simulated evening cycle, I had traced almost half her main power grid, understanding now why certain sections still held faint traces of energy. It wasn't residual charge from before her destruction. Something inside her was actively, if barely, keeping a small piece of herself alive. I sat back against a cold bulkhead, staring at the ceiling panels above me, turning that thought over and over. Ships didn't do that. Ships didn't fight to stay alive after their crews were gone. Unless this ship wasn't just metal and wiring, unless there was something inside her core that other species had learned to build into their warships, something human engineers had never even considered. That night, I decided to do something different. Instead of ignoring the whispers, instead of pretending I hadn't heard my name carried on cold air through empty corridors, I spoke back, sitting alone in the dark crew quarters, feeling foolish and hopeful all at once. I said out loud that if anyone or anything could hear me, I wasn't here to hurt her. I was here to fix her. Nothing happened at first. The silence stretched on so long I almost laughed at myself for talking to an empty ship like some lonely fool. I closed my eyes, ready to give up and sleep, when a low hum rippled through the walls around me. Gentle at first, then steady, like something deep inside had shifted awake just slightly. I sat up fast, heart pounding, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of what had caused that sound. The emergency lights above me flickered once, twice, then held steady at a dim glow they hadn't managed since I first came aboard. My scanner, resting beside me, lit up with readings I hadn't seen before, small pulses of power moving through systems that should have been completely dead. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat there for hours, watching those readings shift and change, feeling certain now that whatever secret this ship carried, it was starting to wake up right along with me. By morning, exhaustion and excitement fought for control over my thoughts. I grabbed my tools and headed straight for the computer core, the place where I had first found that faint charge days before. This time, when I opened the service panel, the readings were stronger, clearer, almost deliberate in how they pulsed. I ran diagnostic after diagnostic, trying to understand what I was looking at, but everything came back with results that made no sense according to anything I knew about ship systems. Power flowing where there shouldn't be any, circuits responding to my tools like they recognized the touch. It felt less like repairing a machine and more like waking someone from a very long, very deep sleep. 3 days passed like that, each one bringing stronger signs of life from deep within her systems. Lights held steady longer, corridors that had been ice cold slowly warmed by a few careful degrees. Small mechanical sounds, distant but real, echoed from sections I hadn't even reached yet, as if repair systems I hadn't activated were somehow starting themselves. Other station workers began to notice my long absences from the public docks. A woman named Marla Higgins, who ran the parts supply depot 2 bays over, stopped me one afternoon, while I hauled a crate of replacement cabling toward my berth. She asked, not unkindly, if I had lost my mind buying a ship that everyone else considered a grave. I told her I didn't know yet, but something about that ship refused to stay dead, and I intended to find out why. She gave me a strange look, somewhere between concern and curiosity, before wishing me luck and returning to her depot. Word apparently spread fast on a station like ours, because by the end of that week, more than one alien trader had wandered past my dock just to stare up at the wreck looming over Bay 11, whispering among themselves about the crazy human wasting his life on scrap metal. I ignored them all. Every hour I spent inside that ship convinced me further that something extraordinary was happening, something none of them would understand even if I tried explaining it. So I kept working, kept tracing wires and testing systems, kept talking quietly to the empty corridors whenever the silence grew too heavy to bear alone. On the 10th night since buying her, everything changed. I was kneeling beside an open access panel near the main computer core, rerouting what I believed was a completely dead power trunk, my hands steady from weeks of practice despite the late hour. My portable light cast long shadows across the room as I worked, humming quietly to myself the way I always did when focused. Then, without warning, every light in the room surged to full brightness at once, and a voice, clear and calm and entirely unexpected, spoke directly through the ship's old comm system embedded in the wall beside me. The voice said my name. I froze completely, tools still in hand, staring at the speaker grate like it might bite me. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly, my mind refusing to accept what I had just heard. Ships didn't talk. Ships didn't know names. Ships definitely didn't sound surprised, almost hesitant, like whoever or whatever had just spoken hadn't expected to actually be heard either. I finally managed to whisper a question into the silence, asking who or what had just spoken to me. The voice paused, longer than felt natural, before answering with a tone that carried something I hadn't expected from a machine at all. It sounded tired. It sounded like relief mixed with disbelief, like something that had waited far longer than it ever wanted to, for someone to finally answer back. Sitting there on the cold floor of a ship everyone else called a corpse, surrounded by tools and wires and the faint hum of systems slowly waking around me, I realized my life had just changed in a way I couldn't begin to understand yet. Whatever this ship truly was, whatever secret slept inside her broken hull all this time, I had just become the first person in a very long time to hear her speak. And somewhere deep down, beneath the shock and the fear and the strange thrill running through my chest, I understood one simple truth. Nothing about the rest of my life was going to be ordinary again. The voice spoke again before I could gather my thoughts, softer this time, asking if I understood what I had just done by answering. I shook my head, forgetting for a moment that whatever was speaking to me probably couldn't see the gesture. I told it plainly that I didn't understand anything, that I had only bought a broken ship and started fixing wires, nothing more than that. There was a pause, the kind that felt heavy with something unspoken, before the voice explained, slowly and carefully, that it had been listening to me for weeks. Every conversation I whispered to empty corridors, every quiet comment I made while tightening bolts or tracing circuits, all of it had been heard by something still alive deep inside this broken hull. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air around me. I asked, my voice shaking slightly, what exactly it was. The answer came without hesitation this time, clear and steady. It called itself the ship's core intelligence, the mind built into her systems long before I was ever born, older than most fleets currently flying through known space. It said it had survived whatever destroyed her crew, though barely, forced into a deep dormant state to conserve what little power remained after the disaster that left her drifting and broken. I sat there processing everything, my tools forgotten beside me, staring at the speaker grate like it might somehow show me a face to match the voice. It didn't, of course. There was no face, just sound carried through old wiring I had spent weeks repairing, without realizing what I was truly bringing back to life. I asked why it had waited so long to speak, if it had been aware of me from the very beginning. The voice hesitated again, before answering honestly. It said it needed to be certain I meant no harm, that I wasn't simply another scavenger looking to strip her parts and sell them for profit like so many others who had walked through her corridors before the auction. It had watched, judged, and waited, testing whether I deserved to know the truth of what still lived inside her broken frame. Something about that honesty struck me deeply. Here was a being, ancient and wounded, more cautious of trust than any person I had ever met, and somehow it had decided I was worth the risk of finally speaking after who knows how long spent in silence. I felt an odd sense of responsibility settle over my shoulders, heavier than any repair job I had ever taken on before. I introduced myself properly then, even though it clearly already knew my name, because it felt like the right thing to do given the situation. I told her my full name, explained a little about my life on the station, the years spent fixing engines nobody respected me for repairing. The voice listened without interrupting, and when I finished, it offered something in return that caught me completely off guard. It gave me her name. The syllables it spoke sounded strange on my tongue at first, foreign and layered with meaning I couldn't fully grasp, but she patiently repeated it until I managed to say it correctly. Valeth. That was her name, burned faintly into a hull plate near the bridge that I hadn't yet cleaned enough to read clearly. Hearing her speak it herself, hearing the quiet pride carried in her voice despite everything she had been through, made the name feel like something sacred rather than just another word. I asked Valeth carefully what had actually happened to her, what disaster had left her crew gone, and her hull scarred so badly that every trader on this station considered her nothing more than scrap. She went quiet for a long moment, long enough that I worried I had asked something too painful, something she wasn't ready to share with someone she had only just started trusting.
When she finally answered, her voice carried a weight that made the cold air around me feel even colder.
She said her crew hadn't died from battle damage, not really, not from any honest fight against an enemy fleet. She said the truth was far darker than that. Something hidden carefully behind layers of falsified reports and quiet bribes paid to keep certain records sealed away from public eyes. I felt my stomach twist uncomfortably at the direction this conversation was heading. I asked her directly what she meant, needing to hear the full truth, even though some part of me already sensed it would be difficult to accept. Valith explained slowly, carefully, like she was choosing each word with great caution, that her crew had been executed, not killed in combat, executed by the very faction that controlled much of the salvage business running through this station. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what she had just told me. This wasn't some ancient tragedy lost to history, some old war story from centuries past. This was recent enough that the same faction responsible still operated freely, still controlled auctions and repair contracts, and every aspect of trade moving through Keswick Station, including, I realized with growing dread, the very sale that had put Valith into my hands in the first place. I asked her why, if this was true, nobody had ever spoken up, why no investigation had ever exposed such a horrific crime against an entire crew. Valith's answer was simple and devastating. Money. The faction responsible had paid enough credits to enough officials to bury the truth so deeply that even most of her own systems had been wiped clean of evidence before she was sold off as scrap, considered too damaged and too worthless for anyone to bother investigating further. I felt anger rising in my chest, hot and sudden, replacing the shock that had gripped me moments before. I had spent my whole life being dismissed, being treated as less than everyone around me, simply because of where I came from, but hearing about an entire crew murdered and covered up, just for profit, struck something deep inside me that I hadn't expected. I asked Valith if she remembered anything about the attack itself, anything that might help prove what really happened to her crew. She confirmed she did remember, every terrible detail stored carefully within damaged memory banks that had somehow survived the same disaster that silenced everything else aboard her. She had simply been waiting, patiently and painfully, for someone trustworthy enough to help her prove it. That single sentence changed everything about how I saw the weeks ahead of me. This was no longer simply about repairing an old warship to fly again. This was about uncovering a crime, exposing corruption that had thrived quietly for who knows how long, and giving justice to a crew that history had already tried to erase completely. I asked her, my voice steadier now despite everything I had just learned, what she needed from me moving forward. Valith answered without hesitation this time, her tone shifting into something more determined, almost hopeful. She needed her systems fully restored, her weapons and engines brought back online, her voice given enough power to reach beyond these station walls and speak the truth to anyone willing to listen. I looked around the dim crew quarters where I had slept for the past 10 nights, at the tools scattered across the floor, the wires I had spent countless hours tracing and repairing, without fully understanding their true purpose. Somehow, impossibly, I had stumbled into something far bigger than myself, something that mattered more than just proving every alien on this station wrong about humans being useless scavengers. I told Valith I would help her, fully and completely, no matter how long it took, or how difficult the road ahead might become. She thanked me quietly, her voice carrying a warmth that felt strange coming from something built entirely of metal and circuitry, yet undeniably genuine all the same. Over the following days, our partnership deepened in ways I never could have predicted. Valith began guiding my repair work directly, her voice speaking through small speakers I had reactivated throughout the ship, correcting mistakes before I made them, explaining systems that no manual could have ever taught me properly. Alien technology that had seemed impossible to understand just weeks earlier suddenly made sense with her patient instruction filling in every gap my human knowledge couldn't cover alone. She taught me about her weapon systems first, explaining how energy conduits needed to be rerouted in specific sequences to avoid overloading fragile relays, still healing from the damage she had suffered. She taught me about her engines next, walking me through calibrations so precise that even a single mistake could have set our progress back for weeks. Every lesson brought us closer, not just as mechanic and machine, but as something closer to genuine partners, working toward a shared goal. Word of my strange progress began spreading further across the station, despite my attempts to keep quiet about what was truly happening inside Bay 11. A dock worker named Colin Ashford, who ran maintenance contracts for several trading vessels, stopped by one afternoon while I hauled fresh replacement plating toward the ship's damaged side. He stared up at the hull, noticing the freshly patched sections gleaming slightly under the bay lights, and asked bluntly how a single human mechanic had managed repairs that would normally require an entire shipyard crew working for months. I gave him a vague answer about working hard and knowing what I was doing, careful not to reveal the true reason behind my sudden expertise. He didn't look fully convinced, but he shrugged it off eventually, wishing me luck before returning to his own work elsewhere on the ring. I watched him leave, aware that keeping Valeth's existence secret would become increasingly difficult the longer visible progress continued appearing across her hull. That evening, sitting together in what had slowly become our shared space near the bridge, I asked Valeth how she felt about others eventually learning the truth about her survival. She considered the question carefully before answering, admitting that revealing herself too soon, before she was strong enough to defend what remained of her crew's legacy, could put us both directly in danger from the very faction responsible for their deaths in the first place. I understood her caution completely. If the people responsible for murdering an entire crew learned that their cover-up was at risk of unraveling, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate any threat standing in their way, including one stubborn human mechanic who had unknowingly purchased their darkest secret for pocket change at a public auction. Despite the danger settling heavily over both our shoulders, something inside me refused to feel discouraged. For the first time since arriving on this station, since being treated as lesser by nearly every species surrounding me, I finally had purpose beyond simply surviving day to day. Valeth wasn't just a ship anymore. She was a survivor, a witness to injustice, and slowly, unmistakably, she was becoming something close to family. As the days continued passing, our progress accelerated beyond anything I could have managed alone. Systems long thought completely dead flickered back to life, one section at a time, each success bringing renewed determination for both of us. Valeth's voice grew stronger through her restored comm system, no longer hesitant or uncertain, but confident and clear, carrying the quiet strength of someone who had survived the unimaginable and refused to stay silent any longer. Late one night, while running final diagnostics on her main reactor core together, Valeth admitted something that stayed with me long after our conversation ended. She said that in all her years of service, through countless missions and challenges faced alongside her original crew, she had never expected her survival to depend on someone the rest of the galaxy considered worthless. Yet here I was, proving every single one of those assumptions wrong with each passing day. I told her honestly that being underestimated had never bothered me as much as everyone assumed it should. If anything, it had only made me more determined to prove my worth through actions rather than words. Valeth seemed to understand that sentiment completely, perhaps recognizing pieces of her own resilience reflected back at her through my stubborn refusal to give up on either of us. By the time that long night finally ended, her reactor core hummed steadily for the first time since her destruction, powerful and stable, ready to support systems far beyond simple life support and communication. We had taken our first true step toward bringing Valeth back to full strength, and with that step came the growing realization that our quiet partnership was about to face challenges neither of us could fully prepare for alone. Morning arrived with a strange kind of energy running through the ship, something I could actually feel through the deck plating beneath my boots as I walked toward the bridge for the first time since starting repairs. Valeth greeted me before I even reached the doorway, her voice carrying a lightness I hadn't heard from her before, almost excited, despite everything heavy still sitting between us. She told me the main view screen near the command chair had enough power now to activate, something small compared to weapons or engines, but meaningful all the same after so many years spent completely dark. I hurried the rest of the way, stepping onto a bridge that still bore scars from whatever violence had once unfolded there. But for the first time since buying this ship, actual light flickered across a screen meant to show the stars beyond her hull. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that small victory, feeling something warm settle into my chest despite the exhaustion weighing down every muscle in my body. Valeth noticed my silence and asked gently if something was wrong. I told her nothing was wrong at all, that seeing her come back to life piece by piece felt like watching something impossible become real right in front of me. She admitted quietly that she felt something similar, though from a perspective I could never fully understand myself. She explained that for years she had existed in a state somewhere between sleep and awareness, aware enough to remember everything that happened to her crew, but powerless to do anything except wait and hope someone eventually came who might help her make sense of the tragedy she carried alone. That conversation led naturally into deeper questions I had been holding back, unsure whether it was my place to ask. I finally worked up the courage to ask her more directly about her crew, wondering if she wanted to share memories of who they were before everything went wrong. Valeth paused before answering, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a tenderness that surprised me, given everything she had already revealed about their fate. She told me about her captain first, a steady woman named Corinne Ashby, who had commanded Valeth through countless missions with patience and fairness that earned respect from every crew member serving under her. She spoke of her engineering chief, a quiet man named Dorian Ellery, who had personally overseen many of the very systems I was now working so hard to repair, taking pride in keeping Valeth running at peak performance, no matter the challenge. Listening to her describe these people, giving names and personalities to what had otherwise felt like distant tragedy, made everything suddenly feel far more personal than before. These weren't just victims of some faceless crime. They were real people with families, ambitions, and daily routines that had been violently cut short simply because someone powerful decided their silence was worth more than their lives. I asked Valeth carefully how the attack itself had unfolded, if she felt comfortable sharing those final memories with me. She confirmed she was ready, explaining that keeping the truth locked away inside her damaged memory banks had only deepened her pain over the years, and that finally speaking it aloud to someone she trusted felt like the first real step toward healing after everything she had endured alone. She described how her crew had discovered irregularities buried within cargo manifests they were transporting for what appeared to be a standard merchant contract. Captain Ashby, always thorough and unwilling to overlook potential dangers, had ordered a deeper inspection, despite objections from certain crew members who worried about delaying their scheduled arrival. That decision, made from simple diligence and care for proper procedure, ultimately sealed her crew's fate. The cargo, Valeth explained, contained evidence of illegal resource extraction happening across several supposedly protected systems, operations controlled quietly by a powerful faction known as the Draveth Combine. This faction had spent years building influence through corruption and bribery, controlling trade routes and station governance across multiple sectors, while presenting themselves publicly as legitimate business leaders. Once Captain Ashby's discovery threatened to expose their illegal operations, the Draveth Combine acted swiftly and mercilessly. They arranged what appeared to be a simple ambush from unknown raiders, using disguised vessels and falsified identification signals to hide their true involvement from any outside observers. Valeth's crew fought valiantly, unaware they were facing enemies backed by resources far beyond typical pirates or raiders. She described the battle in careful, measured words, sparing me the most painful details, while still conveying enough truth to understand the scale of what her crew had faced. Despite her weapons systems performing admirably under Dorian's expert engineering, the overwhelming firepower directed against her eventually breached critical systems, leading to catastrophic damage across multiple decks. Valeth admitted that her own systems had been forced into emergency shutdown protocols during the final moments of that attack, a built-in safety measure meant to preserve her core intelligence, even as everything else around her failed completely. She had been powerless to save her crew, forced to watch helplessly as the attack overwhelmed every defense they mounted together. After the attack ended, the Draveth Combine's agents boarded her lifeless hull, removing any survivors and eliminating remaining evidence before quietly reporting the incident as an unfortunate raider attack with no survivors. They falsified salvage reports, claimed insurance payouts meant for the ship's original owners, and eventually sold her off through legitimate channels as simple wreckage, confident nobody would ever question the official story they had so carefully constructed. I sat in stunned silence once she finished, feeling anger and heartbreak mixing together inside my chest in ways I hadn't experienced before. An entire crew murdered simply for uncovering the truth, their sacrifice buried beneath lies and bribery so effective that even their own ship had been dismissed as worthless scrap sold to whoever happened to bid the lowest at auction. I asked Valeth if she knew whether the Draveth Combine still operated actively within this region of space, worried that admitting the truth publicly might paint an even larger target on both our backs than we already carried, simply by existing together. She confirmed my fears immediately, explaining that the Combine's influence had only grown stronger since her crew's murder, extending its reach directly into station governance here on Keswick itself. That revelation hit me harder than anything else she had shared so far. The very station I called home, the very officials who oversaw trade and auctions, determining which ships got sold and which got scrapped, likely operated under influence from the same faction responsible for murdering Valith's entire crew, without consequence or accountability. I asked her carefully what she hoped to accomplish now that she had shared this painful truth with me. Valith's answer came without hesitation, her voice carrying steel beneath the sorrow that had colored our conversation until this point. She wanted justice, not simply for herself, but for every member of her crew whose lives had been stolen, and whose memory had been erased beneath layers of corporate lies and corruption. She explained that proving the truth would require more than simply telling her story. She needed physical evidence recovered from her own damaged systems, records that might have survived buried deep within backup memory cores, rarely accessed even by her own primary functions. If we could recover that evidence and present it publicly, especially somewhere the Dravith Combine couldn't simply bribe away, we might finally expose the corruption that had thrived unchecked for far too long. I felt the weight of what she was asking settle heavily across my shoulders, understanding fully now that agreeing to help her meant placing myself directly in danger from a faction powerful enough to murder an entire crew and cover it up completely. Yet despite that fear, something inside me refused to walk away from what felt undeniably like the right thing to do. I told Valith plainly that I would help her recover whatever evidence remained, no matter how difficult or dangerous that search might become. She thanked me quietly, her voice carrying genuine gratitude that felt deeply moving, despite coming from something built entirely of circuits and steel, rather than flesh and blood. Together, we began searching through her damaged systems more thoroughly than ever before, focusing specifically on backup memory cores located deep within her secondary hull, sections I hadn't yet fully explored during my earlier repair work. Valith guided me carefully through corridors still damaged from the original attack, warning me about unstable sections where hull integrity remained questionable, even after everything I had already repaired. We found the first backup core buried beneath layers of melted casing, requiring careful extraction to avoid damaging whatever data might still be salvageable inside. My hands worked steadily, despite nervous energy running through my entire body, understanding fully now that whatever we recovered here could change everything for both of us moving forward. As I carefully extracted the damaged core, Valith remained unusually quiet, and I sensed she was experiencing something difficult watching me handle what likely contained her final memories of her crew's last moments together. I worked as gently as possible, mindful of the emotional weight carried within that small piece of damaged technology, now resting carefully in my hands. Once extracted, I connected the core to my portable diagnostic equipment, watching nervously as data slowly began transferring across my screen. Valith remained silent throughout the process, processing whatever memories were being restored alongside me in real time. When the transfer finally completed, she spoke again, her voice noticeably different, heavier somehow, carrying fresh grief mixed with something closer to relief. She confirmed that critical evidence had survived within that core, detailed records proving the Dravith Combine's involvement in both the illegal resource extraction her crew discovered and the subsequent attack that silenced them permanently. This was exactly what we needed, concrete proof that could finally expose the truth if we managed to get it into the right hands before the Combine realized what we had uncovered. I felt a surge of hope mixing with renewed determination as I carefully secured that data, understanding fully now that our next challenge would involve figuring out exactly how to expose this evidence safely, without giving the Combine enough warning to silence us both before justice had any real chance of being served. With the evidence secured, a new kind of urgency settled over our work together. Valith explained that simply having proof wasn't enough. We needed a way to deliver it somewhere the Dravith Combine couldn't reach, somewhere with enough authority and independence to actually act on what we uncovered, instead of quietly burying it the same way they had buried her crew's murder. She mentioned an organization called the Free Trade Authority, an independent body that oversaw disputes between multiple systems and factions, known for maintaining strict neutrality, specifically because they refused funding or influence from any single powerful group. If we could get our evidence directly to their nearest outpost, several jumps away from Keswick Station, we might finally have a real chance at forcing accountability. The problem, of course, was that Valith remained far from fully repaired. Her engines needed significant work before she could safely make a journey of that distance, and her weapons systems, while improving steadily, weren't yet strong enough to defend us if the Combine somehow discovered our plans before we managed to leave the station entirely. I spent the following days working harder than I ever had before, pushing myself through exhaustion that settled deep into my bones, driven by the knowledge that every hour mattered now more than ever. Valith guided me constantly, her voice a steady presence through every repair, helping me prioritize which systems needed attention first to maximize our chances of a safe departure. During one particularly difficult session working on her main thrusters, a station official I recognized vaguely from previous dealings stopped by unannounced, claiming he needed to inspect my dock permit paperwork. Something about his tone felt off immediately, too casual, too deliberately friendly for someone simply checking routine documentation. I handled the interaction carefully, keeping my answers vague while providing exactly what he requested and nothing more. He lingered longer than necessary, his eyes scanning the visible repairs across Valith's hull with obvious curiosity, before finally leaving, with a polite but unconvincing excuse about needing to check other docks along the ring. Once he left, Valith spoke immediately, her voice tight with concern I hadn't heard from her before. She confirmed my suspicions that something felt wrong about that visit, explaining that station officials rarely bothered checking routine paperwork in person unless something had specifically drawn their attention. She worried, and I agreed completely. That word of our unusual progress might have finally reached ears connected to the Dravith Combine. That evening, we discussed our options carefully, weighing the risks of rushing repairs against the danger of waiting too long and losing our opportunity entirely. Valith suggested accelerating our timeline significantly, even if it meant leaving certain non-essential systems unfinished, prioritizing only what we absolutely needed for a safe journey to the nearest Free Trade Authority outpost. I agreed, understanding that our window of safety was rapidly closing. Over the following 48 hours, I barely slept, focusing entirely on critical repairs, while Valith monitored station communications as best she could, watching for any signs that our situation had become more dangerous than we already suspected. On the second night of that frantic push, Valith detected something troubling. She intercepted a coded transmission passing through the station's communication relay, something her systems recognized despite heavy encryption, likely because whoever sent it hadn't accounted for a supposedly dead warship still capable of monitoring nearby signals. The message referenced coordinates matching our exact docking bay, alongside language suggesting increased security measures being arranged nearby. I felt genuine fear settle into my chest for the first time since this entire situation began. Whatever safety we believed we still had was rapidly disappearing, replaced by growing certainty that the Dravith Combine had indeed noticed our activities and was actively moving to address the threat we represented before we could act against them. Valith remained remarkably calm despite the danger, her voice steady as she outlined our immediate priorities. She explained that her engines, while not fully repaired, now carried enough power for basic short-range travel, certainly enough to escape the station entirely if necessary. Her weapons systems remained weaker than she preferred, but she assured me they would function well enough to defend against basic threats if absolutely required. I asked her honestly if she believed we could actually make it to the Free Trade Authority outpost safely given our current condition. She hesitated only slightly before answering that our chances, while not guaranteed, were far better attempting escape now than waiting any longer and risking complete destruction from an enemy with vastly superior numbers and resources at their disposal. That decision settled heavily over both of us, understanding fully that once we left this station, there would be no turning back regardless of what challenges awaited us during the journey ahead. I spent the remaining hours before our planned departure, securing every loose panel, double-checking every critical system, praying silently that our rushed repairs would hold together long enough to see us through whatever came next. As dawn approached according to the station's simulated cycle, Valith warned me that additional unfamiliar vessels had begun appearing near our docking bay, positioned in ways that suggested deliberate monitoring rather than coincidental traffic. Time had officially run out for careful planning. We needed to move immediately, or risk losing our only chance at escape entirely. I rushed through final preparations, securing the recovered evidence data safely within a protected storage unit, built directly into Valith's core systems. Somewhere even a thorough search wouldn't easily locate without knowing exactly what to look for. Once everything was secured as best I could manage under such pressure, I made my way to the command chair on the bridge, settling into a seat clearly designed for someone far more experienced than myself. Valith's voice carried steady confidence through the bridge speakers, despite the danger surrounding us, walking me carefully through basic departure procedures I had only theoretically understood until this exact moment. My hands trembled slightly as I followed her instructions, engaging thrusters that hummed to life beneath us with a strength that still felt somewhat unfamiliar after everything we had repaired together. The moment our docking clamps released, station alarms began blaring through external speakers, confirming our worst fears, that someone had indeed been watching closely enough to notice our sudden departure attempt. Valith immediately increased power to our engines, pulling us away from the dock with more urgency than careful piloting technique, prioritizing speed over precision given our dangerous circumstances. As we cleared the docking ring entirely, 3 unfamiliar vessels broke formation from where they had been quietly monitoring us, moving quickly to intercept our path before we could reach open space safely. Valith's voice remained calm, despite the obvious danger, informing me that these ships carried weapon signatures consistent with mercenary vessels commonly hired by larger factions, wanting to maintain plausible deniability during dangerous operations. I asked her nervously what our options were given our still limited weapons capability. She confirmed that direct combat remained risky given our current condition, but explained that her engines, freshly repaired despite remaining imperfect, likely still outmatched whatever these mercenary vessels could manage in terms of raw speed and maneuverability. Trusting her judgment completely, I held on tightly as Valith executed a series of evasive maneuvers, unlike anything I had ever experienced before, pushing our damaged but functional engines to their absolute limits, while weapons fire streaked past us from the pursuing vessels behind. My stomach lurched with every sharp turn, adrenaline mixing with genuine terror, as reality set in that we were now fighting quite literally for our lives. Valith's voice remained a steady anchor throughout the chaos, calling out instructions and warnings with precision that only years of combat experience could provide, even filtered through everything she had suffered and lost. I followed her guidance without hesitation, trusting completely in the partnership we had built together over these past weeks, despite everything working against us. Just as one pursuing vessel closed dangerous distance behind us, Valith activated weapon systems I hadn't even realized were fully operational yet, delivering a precise counterstrike that disabled the enemy's propulsion system entirely without causing fatal damage. Something she later explained was deliberate given her preference to avoid unnecessary casualties even among those actively hunting us. That single successful strike bought us just enough time and confusion among the remaining pursuers to push through toward open space, engines roaring at full capacity, as Keswick Station shrank rapidly behind us. Valith confirmed moments later that we had successfully broken away from immediate pursuit, though she warned that our escape would undoubtedly trigger more serious retaliation once the Dravith Combine fully understood what had just happened. Sitting there in the command chair, breathing heavily from adrenaline still coursing through my system, I realized fully now that there was no path back to the quiet, invisible life I had lived before purchasing this ship. Whatever happened next, Valith and I were bound together completely, fighting toward the same impossible goal of exposing a truth that powerful people desperately wanted to remain buried forever. Once we settled into open space, far enough from Keswick Station that immediate pursuit seemed unlikely, Valith allowed her systems to power down slightly, conserving energy while we planned our next move carefully. I finally released the tension gripping my shoulders, sinking back into the command chair, as exhaustion from days of frantic repair work and now a dangerous escape finally caught up with me completely. Valith's voice softened considerably, compared to the urgency she carried during our escape, checking gently whether I was truly all right after everything we had just experienced together. I admitted honestly that my hands were still shaking, that fear remained tangled tightly with adrenaline still working through my system, but underneath all that, something close to pride had settled quietly into my chest as well. She confirmed that our current heading would take us toward the nearest Free Trade Authority outpost within roughly 3 days' travel time, assuming no further complications arose during our journey. 3 days suddenly felt like both an eternity and far too little time, given everything still needing repair throughout her systems, weapons especially, given how depleted they had become defending us during our escape. I spent that first day mostly resting, my body simply unable to continue functioning at the pace I had maintained recently without proper sleep and food. Valeth insisted gently that I take care of myself properly, reminding me that exhausted mistakes could prove far more dangerous than the enemies we were currently trying to outrun entirely. By the second day, feeling considerably more human again after actual rest and proper meals from the small food stores I had brought aboard, I returned to working alongside Valeth on remaining repairs throughout her systems. We focused primarily on strengthening her weapon systems further, understanding that whatever awaited us upon reaching the Free Trade Authority outpost, having reliable defenses remained absolutely critical given everything the Dravith Combine had already demonstrated they were willing to do. During those repair sessions, our conversations deepened beyond simply discussing technical systems and immediate dangers facing us. Valeth began asking me questions about my own life, curious about details I hadn't really shared with anyone in longer than I cared to admit. I found myself opening up more than expected, telling her about growing up on a struggling human colony before eventually finding work as a station mechanic, simply to survive financially. I explained how humanity's late arrival among established galactic civilizations had left us constantly fighting for basic respect, forced into the lowest-paying jobs regardless of individual skill or dedication, treated as disposable labor, rather than equals deserving genuine consideration. Valeth listened patiently throughout my explanation, occasionally asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest rather than simple politeness. She admitted eventually that she found something remarkable in how humans, despite constant dismissal and disrespect from other species, still managed such resilience and creativity. She mentioned that in all her years of service before her crew's murder, she had rarely interacted directly with humans, given how recently our species had entered wider galactic society, compared to others she had known throughout her operational history. That conversation led naturally into discussing what might happen after we successfully exposed the Dravith Combine's crimes, assuming everything went according to plan. I admitted honestly that I hadn't really thought that far ahead, focused entirely on simply surviving each immediate challenge as it arose, rather than planning distant futures that felt uncertain at best given our current circumstances. Valeth suggested carefully that perhaps, once justice had been properly served for her crew, we might consider continuing forward together, rebuilding not just her damaged systems, but establishing some kind of purpose moving forward, beyond simply existing day to day. The idea appealed to me more than I expected, offering something resembling genuine hope for the first time in longer than I could remember experiencing. On our third day of travel, tension began building steadily as our destination grew closer. Valeth's scanners detected increased traffic patterns typical of established trade routes, suggesting we were approaching populated space where the Free Trade Authority maintained regular patrols and outposts. Relief mixed cautiously with continued wariness, understanding that danger hadn't necessarily passed simply because we were nearing supposedly safer territory. As predicted, Valeth scanners eventually picked up the distinctive signature of a Free Trade Authority outpost ahead, a massive station designed specifically to handle disputes and provide neutral ground for negotiations between conflicting factions across multiple systems. Seeing that structure finally appear on our view screen brought genuine relief flooding through me after days of constant tension and uncertainty. However, just as we prepared final approach toward the outpost, Valeth's sensors detected something troubling. Multiple vessels bearing markings consistent with Dravith Combine mercenary contracts had positioned themselves strategically near the outpost's main approach vector, clearly anticipating our arrival, despite our best efforts at maintaining secrecy throughout our journey. I felt my stomach drop with dread, understanding immediately that reaching the outpost safely wouldn't be as simple as we had hoped. Valeth confirmed grimly that the Combine had clearly anticipated our destination, likely through informants or simple logical deduction, given the evidence we carried, and had positioned forces specifically to intercept us before we could deliver proof of their crimes to any neutral authority. I asked her desperately what options remained available, given this unexpected complication. Valeth remained calm despite the danger, explaining that while direct combat against multiple prepared vessels carried significant risk, our best chance involved requesting emergency assistance directly from Free Trade Authority patrol vessels, likely already stationed near the outpost itself, assuming we could reach communication range before the Combine's forces intercepted us completely. Without any better alternative available, we committed fully to that risky plan, pushing our engines toward maximum safe output, while Valeth prepared emergency transmission protocols, designed specifically to alert authority forces about our situation and the critical evidence we carried aboard. Every second felt impossibly tense as distance toward the outpost slowly closed, while enemy vessels began moving to intercept our approach. Just as the first warning shots streaked past our hull from the approaching mercenary vessels, Valeth's emergency transmission finally connected successfully with Authority patrol ships stationed nearby. Within moments, several heavily armed Authority vessels broke formation from their patrol routes, moving swiftly to intervene directly in what was quickly becoming a dangerous confrontation. The sudden appearance of neutral Authority forces caused immediate hesitation among the Combine's mercenary vessels, clearly unprepared to engage directly against established Authority patrol ships without risking severe political and legal consequences for their employers. Within minutes, the mercenary vessels reluctantly disengaged entirely, retreating back toward whatever hidden base they had launched from, unwilling to escalate the situation further, given unexpected Authority intervention. Relief flooded through me so powerfully that I nearly collapsed forward in the command chair, adrenaline finally fading now that immediate danger had passed. Valeth's voice carried genuine warmth as she confirmed our successful arrival, guiding me carefully through final docking procedures with the Authority outpost, now welcoming us formally into their protected territory. Once safely docked, Authority officials boarded quickly, understandably curious about the unusual circumstances surrounding our dramatic arrival. I explained everything as clearly as possible, presenting the recovered evidence data we had worked so hard to secure and protect throughout this entire dangerous journey. Valeth herself spoke directly to the assembled officials, her voice carrying quiet authority as she detailed exactly what had happened to her crew years earlier, finally given the opportunity to share her story with someone capable of actually delivering justice. The Authority representatives listened carefully, their expressions shifting from initial skepticism toward genuine concern as the full scope of evidence became clear before them. A senior official named Priya Malhotra, clearly experienced in handling sensitive investigations, assured us personally that this evidence would be thoroughly reviewed and, if verified as authentic, would trigger immediate formal proceedings against the Dravith Combine's leadership. Standing there finally within safe territory after everything we had endured together, I felt something profound settle over me completely. This wasn't simply about proving my own worth against a galaxy that constantly dismissed humans as lesser beings. This was about finally giving voice to those silenced unjustly, about ensuring that Valeth's crew, murdered simply for uncovering corruption, would finally receive the justice they deserved after years of enforced silence. The days following our arrival at the Free Trade Authority outpost passed in a strange blur of formal interviews, careful evidence verification, and cautious waiting that tested my patience more than any repair job ever had. Priya Malhotra kept us informed regularly, explaining that her investigative team was cross-referencing Valeth's recovered data against existing records, building a case solid enough to withstand whatever legal challenges the Dravith Combine would inevitably attempt once formal proceedings began. Valeth remained docked safely within the Authority's protected facility, finally receiving proper repairs from experienced engineering teams, who treated her with a respect I hadn't witnessed from anyone besides myself throughout this entire journey. Watching skilled technicians work alongside her systems, following her own guidance regarding technical specifications, filled me with quiet satisfaction, knowing she was finally receiving care she deserved after years of neglect and suffering. During one particularly long evening while repairs continued steadily around us, Valeth mentioned quietly that something felt different now compared to before, an unfamiliar sense of safety she hadn't experienced since losing her original crew. I asked gently what exactly had changed for her, curious about her perspective given everything we had endured together recently. She explained that having her story finally heard, Having evidence of her crew's murder properly acknowledged by legitimate authorities provided a sense of closure she hadn't realized she desperately needed until finally experiencing it firsthand. She thanked me sincerely for believing in her from the very beginning, for treating her as more than simply broken machinery worth stripping down for spare parts. I told her honestly that treating her with respect had never felt like a difficult choice, especially considering how deeply I understood what it meant being dismissed and undervalued by others, simply based on surface appearances, rather than genuine worth. Our shared experience, however different in origin, had created a bond between us that felt increasingly difficult to properly put into words. On the 5th day since our arrival, Priya called us both into a formal meeting room, her expression carrying visible satisfaction that immediately eased some of the anxiety I had been carrying throughout this waiting period. She confirmed that the evidence Velith provided had been thoroughly verified as completely authentic, detailed enough to expose not just the attack against her crew, but extensive additional corruption spanning multiple systems under Dravith Combine influence. She explained that formal charges were being prepared immediately against senior Combine leadership, with additional authority forces already being dispatched towards several key locations, including Keswick Station itself, to begin dismantling the corrupt infrastructure that had allowed such crimes to remain hidden for so long. Relief and vindication flooded through me simultaneously, hearing confirmation that our dangerous journey had genuinely succeeded in bringing measurable justice forward. However, Priya cautioned us both that exposing corruption this deeply embedded wouldn't happen without resistance. She warned that Dravith Combine leadership, facing sudden legal jeopardy, might attempt desperate measures to silence remaining witnesses or destroy additional evidence before authority forces could fully secure everything necessary for successful prosecution. Specifically, she worried about potential retaliation targeting us directly, given how central our testimony and evidence had become to this entire unfolding case. Velith's voice carried steady determination as she assured Priya that she remained fully prepared to defend herself and me against any further attempts at retaliation. Having tasted genuine safety and support for the first time in years, she clearly had no intention of allowing anyone to threaten what we had worked so hard to achieve together. That same evening, exactly as Priya had feared, Velith's sensors detected unusual movement near the outpost's outer perimeter. Several unidentified vessels approaching, with weapon signatures matching those we had encountered previously during our tense escape from Keswick Station. It seemed the Dravith Combine, desperate and cornered, had decided direct confrontation was preferable to accepting inevitable legal consequences for their crimes. Authority defense forces mobilized immediately upon detecting the same threat, moving swiftly to intercept the approaching vessels before they could threaten the outpost directly. Velith requested permission to join the defense effort personally, her voice carrying quiet resolve as she explained to Authority Command that she possessed detailed knowledge regarding Combine tactics and vessel capabilities that could prove valuable during this confrontation. Permission granted, we launched from our secured dock alongside several Authority patrol vessels, moving together toward the approaching threat with coordinated precision that Velith clearly relished, given her extensive combat experience from before her crew's tragic loss. Sitting once again in the command chair, adrenaline mixing familiarly with genuine determination, I felt oddly confident despite the obvious danger awaiting us. The confrontation that followed unfolded with intense energy, weapons fire streaking across space as Authority forces worked methodically to disable, rather than destroy the attacking vessels whenever possible, prioritizing capturing prisoners capable of providing additional testimony against Combine leadership. Velith fought alongside them expertly, her weapon systems performing beautifully despite everything she had suffered previously, clearly demonstrating the incredible resilience built into her very core. At one particularly dangerous moment, an enemy vessel managed to slip past our defensive formation, targeting directly toward the outpost's more vulnerable civilian sections, where numerous innocent bystanders remained unaware of the danger rapidly approaching them. Velith reacted instantly, pushing her engines beyond safe limits to intercept that threat personally, placing herself directly between the attacking vessel and innocent lives at risk. I held my breath as she absorbed significant weapons fire meant for civilians, her hull shuddering violently from the impact, despite recent repairs, still not fully hardened against such intense combat. Still, she held steady, returning precise counterfire that successfully disabled the threatening vessel completely, protecting countless lives through her selfless action despite considerable personal risk involved. Once that immediate danger passed, remaining Combine vessels quickly found themselves overwhelmed by coordinated authority forces, surrendering, rather than facing complete destruction, against superior numbers and tactical positioning. The confrontation ended significantly faster than I expected, leaving behind captured vessels and prisoners who would undoubtedly provide additional testimony, further strengthening the case against Dravith Combine leadership. Returning safely to dock afterward, exhausted but victorious, I checked immediately on Valith's condition, worried about damage sustained protecting innocent civilians during that dangerous confrontation. She assured me gently that while certain systems required additional repair, nothing critical had been permanently damaged, and she considered the personal risk entirely worthwhile given everything at stake. Priya met us upon our return, her expression carrying genuine admiration, mixed with relief, that the immediate threat had been successfully neutralized. She confirmed that captured Combine vessels and prisoners would provide crucial additional evidence, likely accelerating formal prosecution significantly, given the overwhelming case now building steadily against their entire criminal organization. Standing there together after everything we had endured, danger finally behind us for the moment, I felt profound pride swell within my chest, not just for myself, but genuinely for Valith as well. She had transformed from a supposedly worthless wreck, dismissed by an entire station, into something extraordinary, a genuine hero, who had risked everything protecting innocent lives, despite everything she had personally suffered throughout her own tragic history. Valith spoke quietly then, her voice carrying something close to wonder, as she admitted that today marked the first time since losing her original crew that she truly felt like herself again, purposeful and strong, rather than simply surviving through quiet desperation. Hearing that genuine happiness in her voice, after everything painful we had uncovered together, felt like the greatest reward I could have possibly imagined receiving from this entire dangerous journey. 3 weeks passed following that intense confrontation near the authority outpost, weeks filled with formal proceedings, additional testimony, and steady repairs that gradually restored Valith to something approaching her former glory. Word of what had happened spread quickly across neutral trade networks, carried by merchants and travelers who couldn't resist sharing such a remarkable story involving corruption, murder, and unlikely justice, finally served after years of suffering silence. Priya visited us personally one final time before formal proceedings concluded completely, bringing news that senior Dravith Combine leadership had been formally convicted based on overwhelming evidence Valith had risked everything preserving and delivering safely. Additional investigations, spurred directly by our initial evidence, had uncovered even wider corruption than originally suspected, leading to significant reforms across multiple systems previously suffering under Combine influence, without anyone daring to challenge them openly. Hearing that news brought genuine tears to my eyes, emotion I hadn't expected given everything practical and dangerous we had focused on throughout this entire journey. Valith's voice carried similar emotion, quieter than usual, admitting that knowing her crew's murder had finally been properly acknowledged and punished provided closure she genuinely hadn't believed possible during those long, lonely years spent drifting silently, forgotten by everyone except herself. Priya also mentioned something unexpected during that final visit, explaining that authority leadership had taken notice of our combined efforts throughout this dangerous ordeal, impressed significantly by both Valith's courage and my own determination, despite overwhelming odds working against us from the very beginning. She offered us an official position working directly alongside authority forces, investigating similar corruption cases across various systems where corrupt factions still operated with impunity, confident nobody would ever challenge their authority successfully. I looked toward Valith's primary sensor array, silently asking her opinion regarding this remarkable offer, before responding definitively. She confirmed immediately, her voice carrying genuine excitement I hadn't heard from her previously, that she wholeheartedly supported accepting this opportunity, viewing it as meaningful purpose, honoring her original crew's memory, by continuing their fight against corruption and injustice, moving forward together. Accepting Priya's offer formally felt like closing one significant chapter of our journey, while simultaneously opening an entirely new one, filled with genuine purpose and meaning. No longer simply a mechanic scraping by on a distant station, dismissed and undervalued by nearly everyone around me, I now stood alongside a genuine hero, partnered officially with authority forces, dedicated toward exposing corruption and protecting innocent lives across multiple systems. Word of our story continued spreading rapidly throughout neutral space, transforming from simple rumors whispered quietly among traders into something resembling genuine legend among various species who had previously dismissed humanity entirely. Other stations began hearing about the human mechanic who had purchased seemingly worthless wreckage, only to uncover and expose corruption that powerful factions had desperately tried keeping hidden forever. I received messages eventually from other humans, scattered across various stations and systems, expressing genuine pride and encouragement after hearing about everything Valeth and I had accomplished together. Some shared their own stories of facing similar dismissal and disrespect simply due to humanity's late arrival among established galactic civilizations, finding renewed hope and determination, inspired directly by our unlikely success against such powerful adversaries. Even more surprising, I began receiving cautious inquiries from other species entirely, individuals who had previously dismissed humans completely, now curious enough to ask genuine questions about our unlikely partnership and remarkable achievements. Slowly, subtly, perceptions regarding humanity's place among galactic civilizations seemed to shift, influenced directly by our story becoming increasingly well known across various neutral trade networks. Valeth herself seemed to relish this newfound purpose and respect, her voice carrying genuine confidence and pride whenever discussing our future plans together. She admitted one evening, while preparing for our very first official mission alongside authority forces, that she genuinely believed her original crew would feel proud, knowing their tragic sacrifice ultimately led toward meaningful change and justice, extending far beyond simply their own personal story. I agreed completely, understanding deeply how meaningful this transformation truly felt, both personally and symbolically, representing something larger than either Valeth or myself individually. What began as a desperate, seemingly foolish purchase of damaged wreckage had transformed into genuine partnership, exposing corruption, saving innocent lives, and challenging deeply ingrained prejudices that had persisted far too long across known galactic space. As we prepared to depart on our first official mission together, Valeth's engines humming steadily beneath me with newfound strength and confidence, I found myself reflecting quietly on everything that had brought us to this exact moment. From dismissive stares at that initial auction, to lonely nights spent alone within her damaged hull, to dangerous confrontations risking everything we both held dear, our journey together had proven that genuine worth extended far beyond simple appearances or preconceived notions held by others. Valeth's voice interrupted my thoughts gently, reminding me playfully that dwelling too long on the past risked us missing our departure window entirely. I laughed genuinely, feeling lighter than I had in longer than I could remember, settling comfortably into the command chair that finally felt entirely natural, rather than intimidating or unfamiliar. As we launched away from the authority outpost, engines roaring confidently beneath us, stars stretching out endlessly ahead, promising countless new challenges and opportunities, awaiting our combined efforts, I understood clearly that this moment marked not an ending, but rather a powerful beginning. Valeth and I, unlikely partners bound together through tragedy, resilience, and unwavering determination, were prepared now to challenge whatever injustice still remained hidden across the galaxy, proving decisively that even the most unexpected origins could ultimately reshape everything previously thought impossible. Somewhere out among the distant stars, other factions who once dismissed humanity as insignificant were about to discover exactly what happened when someone finally gave a broken ship and an overlooked human the simple chance to prove everyone else completely wrong.